guys like books or not?
No thanks.
Okay. Morning. Would you like a book?
Good job.
Oh, thanks. Good morning.
Morning.
Would you like a book?
Jerry.
Let's see. There we go. Welcome to the Unitarian Church of Lincoln this Sunday morning. I'm the Reverend Dr. Oscar Sinclair. I'm joined on the chancel by our worship associate, Mary Kay Stillwell. I am so excited to start March. The weather is very May-like outside. But the reason that I'm excited about March is because we have a new monthly theme. Our monthly theme for the month of March is transformation, and it's one that it is not an exaggeration to say that I've been thinking about how I want to preach on for 6 months since these themes came out. So we have a 5-week-long sermon series. But we do that. I'm excited about that because as part of this welcome that we do every single Sunday morning, I say this: the Unitarian Church of Lincoln is a loving community uniting reason with spiritual exploration to transform ourselves and transform the world. The thing that we say that we are about is transformation. And so for the next 5 weeks, we're going to be talking about what that means to transform ourselves, to transform the world, to transform our church, all of the changes that brings, all of the feelings that come with change. And then we end on Easter, which is a Sunday about transformation. But that will be an all-ages service this year. So I'm excited to gather together. As a reminder, whether you are here in person or on our live stream, the thing that makes all that transformation possible is the welcome that we extend to each other. Whether this is your first time here or your 500th, however old you are, whomever you love, whatever your age, whatever your gender, whatever your skin color, this is a place where you are welcome. It is good to be together. We'll start by lighting our chalice.
A True Story by Lee Kenvey. This chalice is for the living, the changing, the becoming. This chalice is for the losing the script of your life, the chapters about who you are in other people's stories. This chalice is for the lost GPS that was supposed to show you how to get where they expected you to go. This chalice is for skipping the directions, coloring outside the lines, painting not by number, but by silence, by wild abandon, with a brush that you made yourself from the light deep within. Startling, vivid, a new voice that already knows you. Finally, a true story. And we'll start off with hymn 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In. Stand as you are able.
Sorry.
Oh, am I too loud?
I actually could use some help because we have kind of a show and tell time for all ages this morning. All right. Grown-ups can help too. Grown-ups, actually, this time for all ages may need some grown-up help. I'm just going to let you know. So this is a lesson that I borrowed from a friend of mine named Jamie Dingus. And later on this morning, we're going to be talking about change and how some things change and some things stay the same, and how the tools that we use change over time, but the things that we're doing don't change. So in thinking about this, I dug up some fossils. And what I need is help telling the adults what these fossils are. All right? So we have our first fossil. Does anybody know what this is? Ailish knows what this is. A CD. That's close. We'll get to that later. Let's see. Any adults know what this is? A 45. What do you do with a 45? You play it. So it has 45 songs on it, right? One song per side.
One side revolutions a minute.
Goodness gracious. This whole thing is 2 songs. Okay, that's our first fossil. Let's see. What is this thing?
Oh my gosh!
Does anybody remember what this is? It's an 8-track. What do you do with an 8-track? You play music. Okay. You play the Beach Boys. How many songs are on an 8-track?
8.
I always thought it was 8, but this one has 12 songs on it. Okay, also for playing music though. What about this? A cassette tape. So how does that work? You put it in a cassette player and it plays music. Now, a pencil somehow figures into this. That's how you fix it. Well, yes. So when I was a kid, this is actually what I listened to music on. Cassette tapes were the main way that we listened to music when the Great Hymnal was written. True story. All right.
The main way that we discovered world music.
And the main way we discover world music, like Sketches from Spain by Miles Davis. Does anybody know what this one is? We got it earlier. I think it's a coaster. It looks like this. Yeah, so this is a CD. Also, for listening to music. Or stories. And we have one last thing. Does anybody remember what this is? An MP3 player. It's an antique now. This took longer to find than the rest of this. This was harder to find than an 8-track. It's an MP3 player. So all of these things, 45, an 8-track, a cassette tape, a CD player, and an MP3 player, all are things that we listen to music on. Do we use any of these now? Some of us do. Yeah. Okay. So some of us still use these tools. This actually came out of my office. Because I am young and hip. What do we usually listen to music on now? Spotify? Yeah, so phones. Yep. So we'll just put a smartphone right there. Okay, all of those are ways to listen to music. The tool changes, but the thing that we're doing stays the same. And we don't need to just talk about music. We could do this with how we record things. So sometimes we record things in notebooks. We've been recording things in notebooks for a very long time. You could also use a CD player or one of these.
Oh,
This
geez.
is a coaster. Floppy disk. It is not floppy.
No, the floppy disk.
3.5 inch.
That's true. Also for recording things. What else do we record things on? There's a USB drive. These are called,
Hard disk.
well, these are
It's a
called
3.5
floppy
inch.
disks, but they might also be 3D printed save icons.
High density.
These are 1.44 megabytes, if anybody remembers that.
Oh, geez.
That's about 90 seconds of music.
You went around long enough to remember.
All right. So we record information. We listen to music, we record information, which now, actually, mostly on a phone, so we can put that. What about telling stories? How do we tell stories? Ailish. We can tell stories of something that we did, so we can gather together and tell stories. Right? We can read books. What book is that? Is that one fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish? Yeah. So we tell stories with books. We also tell stories with other fossils. We have a lot of fossils this morning. So that became this. Became once again this. All things in this whole time for all ages go back to the smartphone. And we talk to each other. What kind of tools do we use to talk to each other? Let's see if anybody else wants to answer it. We use our mouths. What do you say? Sign language, okay. We call grandma on the phone. Does the phone look like this? How does this work? I'll come back to you. Does anybody know how this works? How does this work? Somebody shout it out. I call people.
Yeah.
Depends on whether you're on a party line.
It doesn't work.
Gotta be plugged into the wall.
Oh, it's gotta be plugged in. Why does the phone have to be plugged into the wall? So, my phone works just fine. No plug there. So, phones. Telephones were used a long time ago too. Yeah, back in the olden days when we didn't have phones like we have now. Yeah, the ancient days. How about before those days, before even telephones? We used to send letters. Yeah, what is this thing? Upside down, what is this thing? A letter? What is a letter for? For sending things that you want to say. So this says, from Reverend Oscar Sinclair to Reverend Natalie Fenmore. And inside is a note to a friend of mine saying, "Hi, I miss you. Things in Long Island." So we always want to talk to each other, whether that's a letter, a phone, or now usually another phone. Actually, can I ask somebody for help? Can I ask somebody that's not related to me for help? Put this letter in the mailbox today somewhere? We don't have a mailbox in here, but maybe if you take that home, or you could just put it in the mailbox right up front of the church. All right. So, for the last 6 months, we've been talking at this church about a big thing called Article 2, where the Unitarian Universalist Association is changing some of the language that we use to talk about who we are. The point of this whole thing, is that the tools that we use change all the time. We have all different ways of listening to music. But the thing that we are doing stays the same. A Bach concerto sounds beautiful whether on a 45, on a CD, or an 8-track. The tool that we use always changes, but the thing that we are doing sometimes stays the same. So that's the lesson this morning. That is what I'm going to spend 20 minutes talking to your parents about while you go to your classrooms. So, any questions about any of these fossils before we go to the classrooms?
Do you mind if I add a comment?
No. What's up, Bill?
Well, hundreds of years before Spotify and CDs and
Right, we have this whole thing.
had the piano, starting about 400 years ago. And people shared music, gathered around the piano.
That is an excellent point. So for those on the live stream, the tool that we left out was the piano, which, believe it or not, predates a 45. Yes.
Was the piano used before, like,
Well,
I think
that's
drums
an interesting
came before
question.
the piano.
Drums probably came first. Yeah. All right. Well, now we will do our next piece of music, which will be a piece of guest music, while kids are welcome to go to their classrooms.
Hello, I'm Kim Zeman, a member of the Board of Trustees. I want to offer a special welcome to those of you who are visiting for the first time. Please join me for coffee and conversation in the gallery after the service. I have a few announcements to share as our church community extends beyond our Sunday morning service. The third winter lecture is tonight on Zoom at 7 p.m. This year's theme is Can Democracy Be Saved? Across the globe, we see many countries displaying some version of liberal democracy, but then gradually yield to strongman rule. Tonight's focus will be on Turkey. The Zoom link was in the Friday e-blast. Many of you received a large postcard in the mail over the weekend about the spring auction. Now is the time to think of items or services that you may wish to donate, such as dinners, baked goods, or handmade items. If you have questions, please stop by the church office after the service. A central part of our service is the time we join together as a community to mark the moments of our lives. We share with one another our joys, our sorrows, the events that mark the steps in our journey. The threads of sorrow and those of joy are intertwined in the fabric of our lives, present for all, remembered by all. We share those threads, and then they are woven together with those of others in our community. Our joys are shared and magnified. We are comforted in our sorrows. I invite you to type into the chat or speak into the shared space your name or the name of another you wished to be remembered in sorrow. Avery. Mary.
Will Shorts.
Will Schwartz. Mark.
Jala.
Jala. Lisa. Lisa. Lois. I don't see anything in the chat yet, but sometimes there's a delay, so I'll check back to it. I invite you to type into the chat or speak into this shared space your name or the name of another you wish to be remembered in joy.
Joanna turned 82 yesterday.
Happy birthday to Joanna, who's 82.
7 weeks after surgery, daughter Rose is walking again.
Rose has been recovering well from surgery.
Our daughter Anna will turn 32 tomorrow.
Happy birthday to Mary Kay's daughter Anna.
And Megan has a baby coming soon.
Megan has a baby coming soon.
Evelyn moved into Eastmont on last Thursday.
Evelyn moved into Eastmont. On the chat, happy birthday to Karen Hafer today. From Duncan, it's a joy to be home. From Lynn Janice, a big thank you to everyone who came to our brother Mark's celebration of life yesterday. Also, Julie Anderson and the cabaret play was wonderful, a great play to see at the Community Playhouse. From Marcia Cedardahl, the week with my California family was wonderful and healing. We know too that there are some joys, some sorrows that are yet unspoken but still deeply felt. Let us hold a moment of silence for everything unspoken. Thank you for your presence. Please stand as you are able and join in the next hymn, 196, Singer of Life.
Some of the lower voices might be willing to sing The Sea of Rose.
So this is the monthly hymn for March. We have not sung it yet. We don't know this hymn that well, but we're going to sing it every Sunday in March. So if it is a little bit of a train wreck today, it will be beautiful on Easter.
Each week, we take up a collection to support the work of the church and our partners in the community. We do this because just as we all grow from our participation in this community, we all give back through our time, our talent, and our treasure. To give, you can text UCL Lincoln and the amount to 73256. That's UCL Lincoln and the amount to 73256. The offering will now be gratefully received. And I believe we have some guest music. Our reading today is The Paradox of Organized Religion by Dan Hotchkiss. Religion at its best is no friend of the status quo. Religion transforms people. No one touches holy ground and stays the same. Religious leaders stir the pot by pointing to the contrast between life as it is and life as it should be, and urging us to close the gap. Religious insights provide the handhold that people need to criticize injustice, to rise above self-interest, and take risks to provide healing to a wounded world. Organization, on the other hand, conserves. Institutions capture, schematize, and codify persistent patterns of activities. People sometimes say institutions are conservative and smile as if they had said something clever. But conservation is what institutions do. A well-ordered congregation lays down schedules, puts policies on paper, places people in positions, and generally brings order out of chaos. Organizations can be flexible, creative, and iconoclastic, but only by resisting some of their most basic instincts. No wonder organized religion is so difficult. Congregations create sanctuaries where people can nurture and inspire each other with results no one can predict. The stability of a religious institution is necessary for the instability that religious transformation brings. The need to balance both sides of this paradox, the transforming power of religion and the stabilizing power of organization, makes leading congregations a unique challenge. And we are going to rise in body and spirit and sing hymn number 95, There Is More Love.
All right. So we're doing a little bit of an experiment this morning for folks on the live stream. We've attempted to put a room mic in the sanctuary so that folks on the live stream can hear us as we sing together. However, that does mean that there's an extra mic in the room and it's been picking up some echoes throughout the service, so I'm actually going to ask that we just mute that during the sermon. All right. The key to congregational leadership is disappointing your people at the rate they can sustain. It is May of 2020, and I'm sitting in the guest room of our house on Sumner Street, staring at an orange wall and a Zoom screen, listening to Lovett Weems give a lecture to the entering Doctor of Ministry cohort at Wesley Theological Seminary. Now, like most congregations, this one, the Unitarian Church of Lincoln, moved fully online in March of 2020 as the novel coronavirus became the COVID-19 pandemic. And in the space of days, everything about how we did church changed. And in a less important, but still felt effect for me, all of the professional development that I had carefully planned out for 2020 was canceled in the span of about 4 days. At home, and with, I thought, some spare time on my hands, we did two things. We got a dog, so that's where the spare time went. But I also called my old seminary to ask what they were doing with their Doctor of Ministry program. We actually have a cohort starting online in a few weeks. They said, how fast can you have your application materials in? Now, as a quick side note, the Doctor of Ministry program is different than a PhD. It is a Doctor of Ministry, not a philosophy doctorate. So within weeks of the pandemic shutdown, some of my more conservative clergy colleagues in Lincoln were proved right that there was, in fact, a demon student at the Unitarian Church of Lincoln. Doctor of Ministry, D-Min. There we go. So I spent the first 3 years of the COVID-19 pandemic navigating the day-to-day challenges. We, collectively, spent those 3 years navigating the day-to-day challenges of congregational life. But then I would go home and study how churches change and respond to adaptive challenges. I did that because I wanted to challenge myself academically, but I also wanted to develop as much expertise as fast as I could with what we were dealing with at the church in those years. During that program, I learned academically and personally that there often were no right answers, just sometimes the right questions to ask. Sorry, I'm checking on the live stream to see how it's working. All right. Can we maybe bring the volume up on my lapel mic for the folks on the live stream? It sounds like they can't hear me very well. And I'm going to leave that here, so folks on the live stream, if it continues to be a problem, or Jean, send me a text and we will do what we can. Church leadership, how to disappoint your folks at the space that we can all withstand, the pace. So the literature on church leadership is a series of grim titles. A Failure of Nerve, Leadership on the Line, Didn't See It Coming, that one's about burnout, Transforming Conflict, The Blessings of Congregational Turmoil, and a personal favorite, How to Lead When You Do Not Know Where You Are Going. The subtitle of that last one is Leadership in Liminal Seasons. Susan Beaumont wrote that book in 2019, and it turned out timely, as most congregations launched into fully online ministry like 3 months after it was published. And everybody was trying to lead when they did not know where they were going, and so they all went and bought Susan Beaumont's book. It was timely, but the book was actually not written with the pandemic in mind, but as a response to the moment that organized religion finds itself in the early 21st century. So we're in the midst of a moment of profound change for churches. We're going to put some slides up here. So this is Gallup survey data. This is church membership among US adults from 1940 to 2020. In the year 2000, 70% of American adults said that they belonged to a church, a synagogue, or a mosque. 20 years later, that number had dropped from 70% to 47%. Now, attendance has decreased over the same time frame. So this is attendance data. It peaked in the 1960s, but held pretty steady until about 2000. In 2000, 44% of people who responded to a Gallup survey said, I have attended church in the last 7 days. Now, every minister who I've ever talked to about this data set will swear that that number is an overstatement, because people generally tell pollsters that they have been to church more often than they have. But they've been asking the question in the same way for 80 years. So it is an apples to apples comparison. In 2000, that was 44%. In May of 2023, that has dropped to 26% attending in person, with another 5% attending church remotely. This one is Unitarian Universalism nationally. This is our membership over the last 20 years, starting in 2001 and going to 2024. And we've seen our membership stay more or less steady. This is every Unitarian Universalist congregation in the whole country, the information that they report to the UUA every February. That's membership. Where we're seeing more challenging numbers is in our religious education enrollment, which is this.
Looks like one of the constellations.
Does look a bit like a constellation. So from 2000 to 2020, nationally, religious education enrollment in Unitarian Universalism dropped 40%. And then it dropped another 40% between 2020 and 2023. Now you can see a little tick up right at the end. That's 2024 data. So two things: that might be us coming out of the pandemic, and that might be that the data just isn't cleaned up yet. This was taken from submissions 2 weeks ago, so it hasn't actually really been cleaned. All told, there are less than a third the number of children in our congregations nationally than there were 20 years ago. So our numbers here in Lincoln look similar. Here's our in-person attendance over the last 20 years. So a couple things. This dip in 2015, that's the year that we were out of this building while it was being renovated. The jump up in 2020 is when we launched a second service. And then the dramatic drop down is when we moved fully online. Now I'll say a couple things. One, this is in-person attendance, so this is actually really hard to measure. The chart is in-person attendance. The dark green line over the last 3 years is what it looks like when you add in live streaming. So the people on Zoom in the moment. There's about 30 to 40 of those most mornings. And then we have another 30 to 40 people who view the service the first week that it's posted. So that's that orange line. We actually don't really know how to measure attendance right now. There's a lot of churches talking about it, but it looks like one of those three lines. The last thing that I'm going to put up is our religious growth and learning enrollment here in Lincoln. This is our RE enrollment on the left, and on the right is that national graph again. I'm putting those up intentionally so that we can see that they are a pattern, right? What's happening in Lincoln is part of a broader pattern of attendance way beyond this church. It's really important to say that because this isn't about anything that we are doing right or wrong in Lincoln. This is an enormous demographic change that goes way past any one program, staff member, set of volunteers, church, city, state, denomination. All right? But I've got these up here because I don't think we do ourselves any favors if we do not look at these data with clear eyes. If we do not occasionally look at them. And again, not about casting blame, right? Because Unitarian Universalists, taking the UUA's numbers, consist of about 0.0, I've lost my numbers here, of about 0.04% of the United States population. And we all have individual stories, right? We're trying to navigate big cultural transitions that we see in our data as we get smaller and smaller, as the data set gets smaller and smaller, from national to denominational to the Unitarian Church of Lincoln. The other thing that I want to say is that the story of the last 20 years of Unitarian Universalism is not a story about decline. We can take that off now. There we go. It's a story of rapid transition in multiple areas, in multiple ways. 20 years ago, I was in a youth group at the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Binghamton, New York. And I was part of a pilot program for this new thing that we were just launching in Unitarian Universalism called OWL, Our Whole Lives Comprehensive Sexuality Program. Bill Sinkford was running for UUA president, encouraging the movement to embrace a vocabulary of reverence, to not be afraid to talk about God and worship and prayer. We've come a long way in the last 20 years. We've worked through the debate about what language we use. I certainly never have any debates with anybody at this church about what language we use in worship. But we have had that conversation for 20 years, and we can continue to have that conversation. I hear Unitarian Universalists regularly talk about their spiritual practices, how they get in touch with sources of meaning in their lives. OWL is no longer an experimental curricula that it was 20 years ago. It is a storied tradition that has changed lives and grown to encompass a broader understanding of gender and sexuality than it had when it launched. Particularly over the last decade, we've struggled with the entrenched, sometimes invisible threads of bias and oppression in our world and in ourselves. This year, we're voting on new language that will fundamentally change how we talk about what the values commonly held among us are. We figured out how to do church online. We figured out how to be hybrid organizations, both remote and in person, all of this in a very, very short amount of time. So one of the things that I want you to hear this morning is that COVID accelerated the pace of that change, but not the fact of it. That change started way before COVID. So back to Lovett Weems and that Demon program in 2020. One of the things that he told us, in addition to being ready to disappoint our congregations, is that change is constant in church systems. Because how could it possibly be otherwise? Churches work in time spans measured in decades, not in months. And in a decade, everything changes. The people in the room change. Who they are changes. The context of the surrounding neighborhood and culture changes. How we listen to music changes. In a church, something is always starting up and something is always ending. Change is constant. The thing about churches, though, is that the things that end really matter to people. So let me tell you a story about a harpsichord. The harpsichord. When I started here 7 years ago, there was a large hand-built harpsichord that lived right there. Now, it was not used. When I knew it, it lived under a handmade cover, looking for all the world like a quilted, oddly shaped piano in the corner of the room. The person who played it most often died well before I moved to Lincoln. Because it was hand-built and a harpsichord, Jim McCabe built it. It didn't hold its tone particularly well. So it required an expensive specialist to come out to tune it every time it was played, not just for Sunday morning, but every time we would rehearse with it. It needed a several $100 tuning. So this was not a central part of the music program of the Unitarian Church of Lincoln as it existed when I started. But let me tell you, it took 4 ministers and 3 music directors almost a decade to find a new home for the harpsichord. This thing that we never used, that sat under a blanket at the front of the sanctuary every Sunday, it's historic, we would hear. It's handmade, we would hear. These things are true. Maybe a professional harpsichord player will join the congregation and will regret losing it. That one seemed less true, but faith is about hope. But we would hear those things because the harpsichord was never just a harpsichord, right? It was the instrument that longtime members remembered gathering around on Christmas Eve to sing Christmas carols with people who are long gone. It was built by Jim McCabe. It had a plaque on it saying, "This is in honor of Vic Seymour." Margaret Seymour literally wrote the book on the history of this place. It was dedicated to her husband. It was built by hand in 1966. So it wasn't just an instrument that we kept trying to donate. It was, in some very real way, the memory of beloveds who had built and sustained this congregation and whose names were not always known to young, new members. We were trying to donate the memory. All congregational leadership is change work, Lovett Weems told us. And all change work in a congregation, if it means anything, is grief work. Because it's not just a harpsichord. It's the background of wedding pictures of a couple that got married in this church 40 years ago. And if change work in churches is grief work, it is necessary work. Because that story ends with the 4th minister, 3rd music director, 10 years, finally finding a home for the harpsichord in the community. It's played regularly now. There's a plaque on the wall right out there with a picture of the harpsichord and a dedication to the builder. And that story also ends with this corner of the congregation no longer with a harpsichord that isn't played in it, but with a small table stocked with art supplies and pipe cleaners. A place with kid-sized chairs for people of all ages to be present on Sunday morning during the service. There are kids there every Sunday morning, other than right at this moment. This is what Dan Hodgkiss is writing about in the reading this morning. The stability of a religious institution is necessary for the instability that religious transformation brings. The need to balance both sides of this paradox, the transforming power of religion and the stabilizing power of organization, makes leading congregations a unique challenge. So the power of the harpsichord's presence, even unused, in the corner of the sanctuary was a felt sense of stability and continuity in this room. Vic Seymour is in this room if the harpsichord is there. And if we're honest about those religious education attendance numbers that we looked at this morning, right? We need to balance that stability with our capacity to serve in new ways. Churches can be vital places of stability in the world, and we who show up in them every week need to think about change. Because what we do really matters. The Unitarian Universalism that I grew up in is constantly welcoming, constantly drawing the circle wide. Organized religion is one of the few places where genuine friendship happens across families and across generations. So just like the harpsichord is not just a harpsichord, the stack of art supplies in the corner of the sanctuary is not just a stack of pipe cleaners. It is a symbol that if you are a parent of a gender nonconforming kid here in Nebraska, there is a church that will welcome you and have a place for you and your child on Sunday morning, period. That we will celebrate that. That we will sing together and support each other. This congregation is a place where if you're an older member whose spouse dies unexpectedly, the church is going to show up. We're going to tell that story in this room, all of us together. We're going to have members of the congregation show up at your door with what my grandma called Jesus au gratin, right? Prayers of healing in a 5-pound casserole dish. A Unitarian Universalist church can take a young adult who is hurting in body and in spirit and feed their soul and deepen their spirit and teach them to sing until they are healed enough to pay it forward to the next person. We are needed in the world. I don't think we just get to look at those numbers, at those graphs pointing down and to the left, and think, oh, well, crap, that's it. We're done. Guess this is it. I don't think we get to do that. Because I know all the stories I just told. They've all happened here. Like here in this place in the last year. That young adult was me, not last year, but 15 years ago. When we come together as UU congregations, we're places that allow people to find themselves and be transformed by love. We have a responsibility to change so that that can happen for the next generation. So, last point, and then we'll start to move to a close here. Don't think for a moment that I'm saying that we can or should or even could change what is fundamentally true about Unitarian Universalism in order to survive as an institution, right? It's all about asking the right questions, not having the right answers. So the right question is not, how do we fundamentally change so that we survive as an institution? You could look at that data and ask that question. No. The thing that makes us who we are is the thing that cannot change. So this is another Lovett Weemsism. He said that churches with a thriving vision don't change who they are, they become more of who they have always been. That's the right question. How do we become more of who we have always been? Because this congregation that I know constantly invites people in, asks us to deepen our faith, shows up for each other and the community. We need to be clear-eyed about the challenges we face, but optimistic about possibilities. This is a place of laughter and place of healing, a place that works to make the world just a little bit better every time we gather. So this is a liminal moment right now as congregations. We're through the pandemic. We're looking at that data set going, we, leadership at congregations, here in Lincoln, nationally, denominationally, are all looking at the same data set going, oh, we don't know what comes next. There are so many questions right now. and the numbers are a little daunting. But however we respond to them and evolve will require change, and change in churches looks and feels like loss. It looks like replacing the harpsichord with a small table for kids. That's why Lovett told us the first day that managing disappointment was the most important skill we could cultivate as leaders in churches. The challenge is that change is going to happen. It's a given. The question is whether it will happen on purpose or not, and how skillful we are at navigating that change. This is the work that we are called to do in 2024. The pandemic is over, and I am over time, but I only have one page left. At least the part that defined us as institutions is over. So most of our congregations, this congregation, is in liminal, uncertain times. And the right thing to do is not find the answers, but discern the right questions. How will we become more of who we have always been? These are liminal, uncertain times, but they are our times. So 150 years ago, a Unitarian Universalist minister named Theodore Parker preached an ordination sermon called The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity. And over the last century and a half, that sermon has become a touchstone for generations of Unitarian Universalists. They ground much of their theology in this one beautiful sermon. It was like 45 to 60 minutes long, so if you ever think that I preach too long, just go back and read 19th century Unitarian preaching. That was on the short side. Channing's Unitarian Christianity, it's 2 hours long. Anyway, Parker, 1860. There's a difference, he preached, between the outward expressions of religion that come and go in each generation. So the liturgies, the culture, the theologies that shift and evolve, and the core, right, the essence of the thing, what he called the permanent, that stays unchanging. The transient and the permanent in Christianity could, with a little editing, be an addition to the literature on leading churches through change. Because what Parker preached is essentially the lesson from Lovett Weems. Things will change, right? Whether we want them to or not. The transient will fall away, in Parker's language. The question then is, how do we do that on purpose? Letting go of what is transient to hold on to what is underneath and behind it. How do we hold on to the purpose at the heart of what we do? Hearing music, connecting with each other, while not being beholden to a particular tool of how we do that. So to put this bluntly from the story this morning, the transient is a 45 and an 8-track. The permanent is the music that's on them. A Bach concerto does not care if it's on a 45 or an 8-track. It is beautiful and transcendent in both formats. In liminal times, we're called to become more of who we have always been. So that means change, yes. Change means grief in churches, yes. But that's not the only story, because it's also a story about adaptation, about transformation. We're lucky in congregations, blessed, I can say that now, that we get to work in decades rather than in months. A lot of congregational leadership is figuring out how to disappoint people at the right rate. But we do not do that change simply for change's sake, but so that in the midst of change all around us, we can take hold of what does not change and become more of who we have always been. May it always be so, and amen. I believe we have one more piece of harpsichord music. All right. That is the end of our service this morning. We are beginning a series on transformation. We're going to be talking about it the whole month of March. As we do that, though, remember that we are talking about transformation because it is what is necessary to do as a church. It is how we become more of who we have always been. It is the thing that allows us to do everything else. So our final hymn, as we close out, is a hymn to the things that do not change. So if you would, please rise in body or in spirit and join in singing hymn number 163 in the gray hymnal, For the Earth Forever Turning.